Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in the listen-only mode until the question-answer portion of the conference. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to introduce your host, Mr. Ed Cheza. Your line is open.
Thank you, Holly, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Carbon Storage in Urban Wood Products. My name is Ed Cheza, and I'm the Deputy Director of the U.S. Forest Service Wood Education Resource Center. Before we start, I'd just like to thank you in advance for attending today's exciting session. I also like to thank and recognize a couple people who are managing and administering this webinar for us, Jill Johnson and Donna Murphy with the U.S. Forest Service. Also like to thank Katie Fernholt with Dovetail Partners, who basically organized the webinar and promoted this webinar. And then lastly, I'd like to thank our two speakers today, Steve Brakovich with Dovetail Partners and Sam Sherrill. We have two great speakers, and looking forward to hear their presentations on this interesting topic. Couple housekeeping items. First, we will have the presentations, and then questions and answering will follow. The webinar is also being recorded and will be posted on the Dovetail Partners and the Wood Education Resource Center website, and we will also email all the attendees the web link once it's posted. Before we begin with the main presentation, what I'd like to do is briefly provide a synopsis of the Wood Education Resource Center, who we are and what we do. Here's our center located in Princeton, West Virginia. We're part of the Northeastern Area State and Private Forestry section of the U.S. Forest Service. And that's our main office and our shop building. Our primary mission is really to foster interaction and information exchange with the forest products industry in the Eastern Hardwood region of the United States. And we're really trying to focus on having a sustainable industry that basically provides consistent jobs and employment, as well as goods and services that we all are accustomed of using from wood-based materials. And also, if we have a healthy and sustainable industry, this provides economic incentives and options to maintain the health and stewardship of our forests. And what we really try to focus on cooperatively is technology transfer that's focused on assisting industry, which is practical, applied, creative, and useful. And that could be in the shape of training, workshops, conferences, webinars like we're doing today, short-term projects with immediate industry impacts, innovation and problem solving. And the only way we, since we have a small staff, can get actions and activities done in the field is through partnerships. Partnerships with industry, with trade associations, with nonprofits like Dovetail Partners, other governmental agencies. Really just trying to work together to help solve problems and make the industry, to the extent practical, as competitive as possible and sustainable. Our annual budget over the last several years has been somewhat in a decline, but our budget has really let us focus on a pretty interesting competitive grants program where we cost share Forest Service money on a one-to-one basis with industry and other partners to focus on maintaining the economic competitiveness of the industry, to help address issues such as phytosanitation issues, the outbreak dealing with emerald ash borer when the trees are removal, best and most economical utilization options, and more recently trying to focus on the sustainable use of woody biomass as domestically we look at renewables and we try to decrease our dependence on fossil fuels and imported oil. We funded over the last 6 years or so over 120 projects, and we're going to hear about a really interesting project here shortly. I'd just like to highlight two to give you a snapshot of kind of what our breadth is. Project that we worked with a national network of forest practitioners basically developed a web help team for wood businesses, for small businesses, entrepreneurs, and you know, a lot of these businesses are very good producing products, and a lot of times they need some assistance with marketing or trying to increase the awareness of potential customers. And with the social media, with the internet, one of the best ways is through their websites. And this help team really is working with small businesses to, you know, even when you place a picture on your website, to make sure the appropriate tags are placed there so that when somebody does a search on, say, kitchen cabinets, hopefully your website is brought up. Another interesting project that we have funded over the years is with the Untitled Chapter Woodwork Institute and other industry partners called the Woodwork Career Alliance. And basically this effort has developed a national standard set of skill standards for tools and machinery, woodworking tools and machinery. And basically it allows employers to know that they have trained employees if they are trained on a piece of equipment such as a router or a table saw, and they've been trained following this set series of, or set protocol on that particular piece of equipment. A very interesting project. Both of these, for additional detail, there's the websites that you could go to find more detail. And really everything that we do with the Wood Education Resource Center is on our website. So for the 120 plus projects, you can go to our website and get a snapshot, a brief overview on every project that we have funded, who it's funded with, what's the overall goals and objectives of the project, and if it is complete, you'll be able to see a final report, location, a website that was developed, location of these webcasts and webinars that a lot of these projects result in. And you can also sort by keywords or by state or by year. So if you're interested in emerald ash borer utilization, you could type those as keywords and find the projects that we have done, or interested in wood energy. So there's a multiple number of ways you can find information that we have posted on our website. And lastly, that's a real quick short overview. If you have any questions, please send me an email note or a phone call. Be happy to answer any questions. Okay, today's main event, carbon storage and urban wood products. We have two well-known presenters in the urban wood utilization field, and Steve Rakovich, who is with Dovetail Partners, and he was also a peer of mine, counterpart of mine with the U.S. Forest Service for many years. Sam Sherrill, who's author of the famous Harvesting Urban Timber book, and if you don't have a copy, you may want to do a search on Sam's name or the title of his publication, and it's a really useful publication filled with facts and information on urban wood utilization. And before I turn it over to Steve and Sam, just like to make a statement. With this whole urban wood utilization arena, Forest Service and others just believe and feel it's important to continue to find economic uses and solutions for this material, because as governmental budgets become tighter and tighter, to remove these trees once they become a hazard or with tornado or natural events, we need to really work together, private-public partnerships, to help generate income from the material through these removals. So without further ado, I'd like to open up now to Steve Rakovich.
Well, thank you, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And thanks to Jill Johnson and Donna Murphy with the Forest Service for helping Ed coordinate this event today. And also thanks to the Wood Education Resource Center for funding this project on carbon sequestration in urban forest products. The work was conducted by Dovetail Partners for this project. So I would like to say just a couple quick words about Dovetail. I have one slide that we're going to look at here. And there we go. That's our homepage screenshot. And Dovetail, for those of you who are not familiar with Dovetail, it's a nonprofit in Minnesota. And in the upper left-hand corner, you can see our web address if you're interested in learning more about Dovetail, dovetailinc.org. And we basically have a motto that we're a trusted source of environmental information. And we have a team of individuals with experience in academia, government, non-government organizations, industry, education. And I think the reflection of our expertise can be found in our Dovetail reports. If you go to our website, you can find we have over 100 reports that we've authored over the past 6 or 7 years. These reports are free, and they are in areas such as forestry, land use, forest products, and forestry certification, green building, green marketing, organizational development, urban wood utilization, and others. So there's quite a host of information there. We have a monthly free newsletter called The Outlook, and you can also sign up for that if you're interested. So that's just a quick overview of Dovetail. Now into the meat of the project, and I'd just like to give a little background on some of the prior research that has been conducted on carbon sequestration. And there have been many reports, many studies on this topic. And as you can see on my first bullet there, most of the projects, or I should say all of the projects that we found, have been on a rural forest or traditional forestry. And these projects have found that wood products, in fact, do sequester carbon and even greater amounts of carbon dioxide equivalent. And that CO2e that you see there, you're going to be seeing more of that indicated in future slides, and that stands for carbon dioxide equivalents. However, one thing that we did find was that there really wasn't any comparable research on sequestration potential of urban forest products. And this shortcoming really led us to do our study, and that's kind of what brings us to today's presentation. So basically, I just wanted to quickly highlight the purpose of this project, and it was to estimate the annual amounts of carbon dioxide equivalent sequestration as the urban forest products industry grows and forms. We looked at 3 major products, and that's what we're going to be discussing here in the next minute or two. Landscape mulch, or chips, ground cover, if you will, would be one product. Biomass, and we're thinking in terms of fuel, chips, as the product number 2 that we're going to discuss. And then the solid wood products, hardwoods, would be the 3rd product. The scenario that we're approaching, or that we approached this project on, was a business as usual approach versus utilization. And when I refer to business as usual, I think most people on this call can visualize urban trees that come down in an urban setting. Typically they're felled, they're limbed, they're bucked, they're chipped, they're hauled, they're unloaded at some destination. And that's what we're referring to as business as usual. Any emissions of carbon dioxide equivalents that's related to utilization efforts, we're going to be examining them from a perspective of above and beyond business as usual. For example, if we're going to be drying lumber, then that would be an emission source that would be above and beyond business as usual. So the first product would be chips, and this is one I think we're all familiar with. Chips are used as ground cover landscape mulch throughout the United States. And that's the first product we looked at. And I think all of you are familiar with the fact that we have large quantities of these that are produced in our urban forest every year. What I refer to as raw chips, in other words, chips straight from the chipper, they can have basically no value or a very limited value as far as someone buying these chips. And they go all the way from the raw chips then to what I call the painted product, or where chips are run through colorizing equipment, and then they're sold in bulk or bagged, and that can be a fairly value-added product. Chips are also used in potting soil, different erosion control products, and so forth. So I don't think there's anything new to anybody there. What we did find, however, as we looked at the research, chips are a short-term product, something that has basically a lifespan of 1 to 5 years or so. And we looked at research in urban environments and in the rural setting, that even when you look out in the rural area, and there's research that looks at chips as, they call it fine woody debris. They look at branches and so forth that come down after timber harvest. How long do those branches actually contribute to carbon storage? All of the research indicates it's a short-term product, just a couple years. There's lots of other benefits for chips, moisture conservation, aesthetics, soil amendments, and so forth, but these other benefits really weren't the focus of our study, but they are important. So the bottom line, if you're looking at chips, and I know this may disappoint some people on the call today, is you were thinking, well, we produce a lot of chips and we're probably storing a lot of carbon, but right now the research indicates that chips basically have a zero long-term carbon storage. And there's the word storage is missing from the slide there at the end, I say, but zero long-term carbon storage. And this is the conclusion that's basically supported by current research. Now, the product number 2 that we looked at was using urban trees for fuel or biomass for heat and or power. And this is popular in some communities. It's particularly prevalent here in the Twin Cities where I'm located in Minnesota. And just a couple key points on this fuel or biomass product. The first thing we did, we looked at it from a displacement or substitution scenario. In other words, we were looking at avoided fossil fuel emissions, and we looked at comparing the combustion of urban wood versus coal, which is a fossil fuel. We also looked at the fuel or biomass from a LCA type approach. And I say LCA type approach. It wasn't a complete LCA or life cycle analysis or inventory, but we did compare wood versus coal, starting at the harvesting of the trees or the mining of the coal, all the way to the combustion of those products. And finally, wood as a carbon neutral issue was something we really didn't address. We didn't want to go down that path because it can be controversial depending on your point of view on it. So we don't make any claims or assumptions one way or the other. We're simply looking at, in the next scenario that I'm going to show you in the next couple slides, we looked at displacing fossil fuels and avoiding fossil fuel emissions by burning urban wood. So here is a kind of an overview of some of our findings, urban trees displacing fossil fuels. A little bit complicated here, but if you just follow me, if you look at the left column, on the left column, urban wood and the moisture content. So we have 1 ton of urban wood at different moisture contents. And if that wood is burned to generate power or thermal energy, it will displace a certain amount of coal that you see there in the middle column. And then on the far right column, you see the avoided fossil fuel emissions from burning wood versus coal. And the typical scenario right now is that wood, as it would come off a city property. It'd be chipped up. It would be roughly a 50% moisture content. That's an average. So really that top line, the top row, is probably the typical scenario. And you should also note that on the left column, as the moisture contents go down on the wood, so as the wood becomes drier, on the right column, the avoided emissions increase. So the drier the wood is, the more fuel efficient it is, more energy efficient it is, and the avoided fossil fuel emissions increase. So there's probably nothing really new in these results except that analyzing the numbers in an urban perspective is a little different. And this slide, as I indicated, has a lot of information that's fairly generic, or it's been shown in other studies. And this slide I just put up, I just highlighted the 1 ton of urban wood, because you can read about that 1 ton of wood basically avoids 1 ton of fossil fuel emissions, and that's roughly what we found in this analysis. It was kind of a one-for-one relationship there. Now the next slide I think will be more interesting from a national perspective. This is kind of the big picture analysis. And one of the assumptions we made in our study, and Sam's going to talk here in the next few minutes about the solid wood, but one of the assumptions we made was that 1% of the urban forest would be removed annually. We had to have a figure that we used, kind of a baseline scenario. And a lot of literature that we looked at suggested that 1% was a reasonable number. In some areas it's going to be higher, and in some years it's going to be higher, but we looked at 1%. So if you look at the left column here, urban wood combusted at 50% moisture content, because that's kind of the standard. And if you look at what I've highlighted in red, if we could combust 10% of the annual tree removals from urban areas every year, we could displace approximately, in the far right column in red, 2.1 million tons of fossil fuel emissions, carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So that's a really interesting number, and in our final report we'll have different scenarios. There'll be numerous levels of trees that we're using instead of just 1% or 10% or 25% that I show in this slide. We'll have other percentages, but this just gives you an idea. Just simply taking 10% of the 1% every year that comes out of our urban forests, we can avoid about 2.1 million tons of fossil fuel emissions. So that's a quick overview of the second product, the biomass fuel. And now what I think is really probably the heart and meat of our study is looking at urban trees and solid hardwood products. And this is where Sam Sherrill is going to lead discussion on. So, Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Donna and Jill, for arranging this today. And Ed, thank you very much for the wonderful description of my book, which is signed copies of which are available directly from the author. Moving along here to the model that we built in Excel is based on a number of assumptions. First of all, we're dealing only with hardwoods. That means we've left out softwoods and paper products. What we were going for is the most conservative estimate. We wanted to be able to say that we think with a high degree of confidence that the estimates that we come up with carbon sequestered in urban forest hardwood products is probably understated, but we feel highly confident, given the numbers that we have, that it is at least as much as we say it is, probably more, but we feel pretty comfortable with the numbers that we've come up with. We used a 30-year time frame. If I were to pick the formal beginning of the urban forest products industry, it would be 2011. So in 2041, we would have estimates for the accumulation of carbon sequestered in urban forest products for that time. We've used two basic sources of information, a report by Nowak and Crane on carbon storage in states, and a study by Smith and others which estimates the percent of hardwood logs that are actually made into products. Ordinarily, lumber is judged by the National Hardwood Lumber Standards, but we add to that the unique characteristics of urban wood that go beyond just the standards set by the Hardwood Association for a fungible product. And in particular, we picked out 5 characteristics which we both think are very important that distinguish urban wood from traditionally harvested wood. And they are provenance, history, figure, color, dimensions, personal meaning, and community meaning. If we add these 2 standards together, we increase the recovery rate from the urban forest, I think, really quite substantially. And I'm going to show you an example, one example that incorporates all 5 of these characteristics. The house on the left is the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. In 1900, George Washington Vanderbilt, the man who built Biltmore, planted a cucumber magnolia to honor the birth of his daughter Cornelia. The tree lived for 108 years, taken down in 2008, and was sawn into large, thick slabs, and tables and other products are being made from that wood today. Here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see pictures of the slabs that are running 6 and 7 feet wide, 10, 11 feet long. And the 2 pictures in the lower right on the left is 2 book match boards, just rough cut. And then on the right is a tabletop made from those 2 boards. And then so in terms of color and figure, well, personally, I've never seen anything that looks like this. In addition, the wood has personal value to the Cecil family. They are the ones who own Biltmore Estate. And because this tree was widely known by both employees of Biltmore, Asheville residents, as well as in tourists, it has community value as well. So it really incorporates all 5 of the characteristics that we think establish urban forest products as unique. As Steve mentioned, we went with a 1% removal and 10% utilization. This is our baseline estimate. The 2 variables in the model, the Excel model, were the size of the urban forest. Basically, this is a proxy measure for the amount of carbon that could be sequestered in the nation's urban forest. Utilization is how much could be extracted and is potentially usable to manufacture forest products. So if we start with no change in the capacity of the urban forest and essentially no growth in the urban forest products industry over a 3-decade period, if the forest products industry, urban forest products industry uses just what it can get, then on average about 1.3 million tons of carbon dioxide would be sequestered every year. And at the end of 30 years, that would have accumulated to just over 36 million tons. And if we, so that's our baseline, and I'm just simply repeating it here for purposes of comparison. Suppose now that the urban forest increased by 1% per year, but the urban forest products industry grew at 0% per year. It simply used what became available to it. Even at that, the average sequestration would be about 1.7 million tons every year, and at the end of 30 years would have accumulated to just over 41 million tons. Then if the urban forest grew at 2%, but again, no growth in the urban forest products industry, at that we'd average 2.2 million tons sequestered annually and just over 47 million tons for the 30-year period. And then finally, in a different kind of scenario, if we assume that the urban forest remained the same over the 3-decade period, but that the urban forest products industry grew at 2% per year, then the average per year in sequestration would be just over 2.5 million tons, and for the 30-year period would cumulatively add to about 73 million tons. I picked 2% because that's 1 percentage point below what has been the typical growth in the nation's gross domestic product, or at least that used to be the case. Our data were divided into 6 different regions covering the nation, and we did these calculations for each of the 6 regions. Previous calculations are for the entire nation. Now, in this case, we took just 2 of the 6 regions and calculated a growth in the urban forest products industry. And what we found, and we can go through and make different combinations, put together different combinations of 2 here, 2 there, whatever, all of them adding up to less than the total of 6 districts. But we found that if we get pockets of growth in these regions, we still get growth in sequestration overall. Sort of the point being, it is necessary for the urban forest products industry to grow at the same rate simultaneously for all 30 years throughout the country, that there could be differential rates of growth. There could be some places where there is growth and others where there's little or no growth, but we'd still get an increase in sequestration. Then the summary of our key conclusions are no storage of carbon in chips and mulch.
And I could just jump in here, Sam, and say that, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of other benefits for using chips as a ground cover, but they weren't a focus of this study. And then the second product that we looked at was wood fuel, and again, we only looked at it from a displacement point of view, a displacement for fossil fuels. And we used that baseline scenario of 10% of removals avoids about 2.1 million tons of fossil fuel CO2 equivalent emissions annually. And again, that's based at 50% moisture content, and that's sort of the typical scenario in an urban situation. So these first 2 products, the chips with 0 long-term carbon storage and the wood fuel as a displacement for fossil fuels, these may not be kind of earth-shattering results, but I think it's good to document them because it really hadn't been investigated before in an urban situation. Okay. And then the next slide, Sam, you can conclude on that.
If we go with the minimum assumptions, the 10% removal that we started with, we're averaging 1.3 million tons of sequestration annually. And again, at the most modest scenario, that leads to the accumulation of just over 36 million tons of carbon dioxide for a 30-year period. And then I want to come back and finally end on a point that I started with, which is these are, given the data that we have and the way we have constructed the model, these are the minimum estimates. This is the very least that it is. Probably it is more, but we feel confident in saying that, again, given the data that we have, this is the very least amount of carbon that would be sequestered over a 30-year period.
And Sam, you might mention about the Excel spreadsheet and the different entries that people can make if they want to run their own scenarios.
Yes, there'll be a 5-week course on how to use that. It's what I did is put together an Excel model, And the two variables are the growth rate and the capacity of the urban forest to sequester carbon, and the other is the potential sequestration in urban forest products. So those two are variable. You can enter any growth rates that appear plausible, and it calculates the sequestration, the net sequestration on an annual basis for the 30-year period, and then it also calculates the cumulative total. The calculations are based on subtracting out carbon emissions that would be associated with drying urban lumber and wood for final use. And we don't assume that 100% are dried. We assume that something less than 100% would be dried and killed, and the remainder would be air dried. It also graphs out then both the annual and the total sequestration, and this will be available with our final report.
And I might just add in final comment that, as you indicated, the final report is forthcoming, and there'll be a lot more detail, obviously, in that report. You can read the report and think about different scenarios that you think might be more appropriate, and you can, as Sam indicated, put in your own numbers. But what we shared today was just some of the major highlights, the major findings, and hopefully this will stimulate enough interest that folks will be interested in looking at the final report. And also, in addition to the final report that will be available through the Wood Education and Resource Center, Dovetail Partners will produce a shorter report. And I mentioned earlier that we have a monthly newsletter and we have 100 or so reports that have already been written. We'll be doing a shorter version of this longer report for a Dovetail publication. So anyhow, there'll be different opportunities for folks to look into this subject in greater detail. And I think with that, we will conclude. And I know we still have a good amount of time. If folks want to ask questions, I'll just turn it back to the moderator.
Thank you. We will now open all the lines for questions. If you do not have a mute button on your phone, dial *6 on your touch-tone phone, and that will mute and unmute your phone to prevent any background noises in the conference. All lines are now open.
Yes, this is Donna, and if you're interested in asking a question, there are a number of ways you can do it. As you can see by the slide that's up, there's a Q&A tab. You can press the Q&A tab, and you can actually type in your question. We will manage those and bring those up in the order that they're asked. Or if you just want to raise your hand, we will give you an opportunity to ask a question via the phone. If you do raise your hand, just introduce yourself when you ask the question because your name does not come up. So at this time, we're going to go into the Q&A, and we are going to begin with questions. And also, please mute your lines if there's some background noise, because all lines are open at this time. Our first question today is from Margaret Fisher, and Margaret is asking, isn't CO2 released back into the atmosphere when it decomposes from one mulch and when it is burned from two, substitution for fossil fuels? How does it compare to the CO2 produced by the burning fossil fuel? And I'm assuming that is for Steve.
Right. I think I picked up most of that question. It was breaking up a little bit. Yes. One of the, and this is where we get into some of the controversy on burning wood for a fossil fuel displacement, because clearly when you burn wood, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. When you burn coal or any other fossil fuel, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So this study did not look at comparing the total amounts of emissions of burning wood versus burning coal or some other product, some other fossil fuel product. We simply looked at the displacement, and with that information, then people can run with it and use it however they see fit. I mean, there's been a lot of studies that have brought up some controversial issues relating to this. There's a study right now out of Massachusetts that that raised a lot of controversy in the forestry community, and we just didn't really want to go there. So all we looked at was if you burn wood in place of, in this example, coal, this is the amount of fossil fuel emissions that you are avoiding. And I hope that is an adequate answer. And I had a little difficulty, again, hearing the total question, but that's we didn't really want to get into that topic because that really wasn't a focus of this study. And but the person asking the question is right. If you burn wood, you are releasing carbon to the atmosphere. However, many people argue that trees are carbon neutral because they take in carbon and then they release carbon. We didn't really want to go down that path as far as trying to argue one way or the other.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Margaret also has her hand up, so I think she might have another question or maybe a question in response to your answer. So, Margaret, would you like to ask Steve that question? I guess not. We'll go to the next question. The next question is from Michelle. And Michelle, I apologize, I cannot pronounce your last name. Can you tell us more about the annual 1% removal assumption? I think Steve just did that, but Steve? Steve?
Well,
oh, okay.
Right, and Sam, you can jump in here. There have been different studies looking at what's the annual removal rate in an urban area, and I haven't seen anything below 1%. I've seen numbers at 2%, 3% or higher. And as Sam indicated, we wanted to be real conservative with our estimates here. So we used the 1%, which is the more conservative number. So the 1% basically says over a 100-year period, you would be turning over your urban forest completely. And Sam, do you want to say anything there?
Yeah, it was just a choice as a place to start. It was just, in my mind, just basically a notch above zero. David McFarland did a study of the 13-county area in southern Michigan to calculate the solid content of the urban forest in that area. And at the end of his report, the question was how much of that inventory would be available, and he assumed 2%. But that 2% means 100% of the 2%. That is, 2% is potentially available, and all of it gets used. So what we did is really cut that from 2 to 1% and then assume that 10% of that. So we tried to come in with just the very lowest, most conservative estimate that was still marginally above zero.
Great. Thank you. Our next question is from Hirini Trivedi, and it is, do the urban products include building products, for example, timber trusses? And also the figure of 1.3 million tons, does it include carbon emissions during transport or carbon emissions during manufacturing and operation phase?
Let's see, the first part of the question is, can this be used in the building industry? Absolutely. It can be used for trusses, for mantle pieces, dried and run through a molder shaper. It can be flooring. In short, urban wood can become any product in any building, just as lumber taken and harvested from commercial forests. The second part of the question was, does this include transportation and processing? It does not include transportation for reasons that will be explained in the final report. We considered it essentially to be a wash, but it does include drying, which is a kiln drying, which is, according to the research that we reviewed, probably the biggest energy consumer in the manufacturing process. So that's how we ended up with net sequestration. We did calculations of what it would cost, what the emissions would be when the wood is dried in the dehumidification kiln.
Great, thank you.
Donna, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry, Ed muted me when he wasn't supposed to. The next question is from Bruce Horrigan. Was dehumidification kiln drying figured into the carbon equation?
Yes, it was, Bruce. That was the one thing that we did figure in. To elaborate on it just a little bit, I mentioned earlier that the country, based on the data that we have, was divided into 6 different regions. So I looked at each region, and I looked at how much of the electricity was generated by fossil fuels, and I used that as a factor in making the calculation of emissions associated with drying. And then that was subtracted from gross sequestration in urban forest products to arrive at the net figure.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Jessica Simons, and she says, great work, Steve and Sam, very interesting. One question, in terms of how carbon mitigation plans are developing communities and governments, how does the sequestration potential of urban wood products compare to other carbon-reducing strategies? Basically, are the numbers promising enough to be a real incentive for cities to boost their wood utilization efforts to get the carbon benefits?
Well, I'll make one comment to start with, and then Sam, you can follow up. And thanks, Jessica, for the question. I know that if you go to the website of a large energy producer here in the Midwest, District Energy in St. Paul, they very proudly state that they are burning about 280,000 tons annually of urban wood, and they are reducing their fossil fuel emissions by 280,000 tons. And in their numbers, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it's just another indication that there's that 1-to-1 ratio. You burn a ton of wood in place of fossil fuel, and you reduce your fossil fuel emissions by a ton. So it's 1-to-1. So we have some other evidence that our numbers are in the ballpark, and clearly this one large utility here in St. Paul, they're touting that as a climate mitigation strategy. So I think there is a lot of potential for this. And Sam, you want to add anything?
Yes, in terms of urban forest products, absolutely. Even with the most conservative assumptions, we're getting a substantial amount of sequestration. If I were to go back in and put in assumptions that reflect my personal estimate of the growth of the urban forest products industry over the next 3 decades, I would raise most of those numbers by quite a bit. I think it's something that it is an important attribute that can be part of the marketing of urban forest products. I think it's something that local officials and nonprofits should be aware of, and it's a major reason for promoting wood from this source, among many reasons for promoting the wood from this source, that it sequesters carbon in a way that will be explained in the report. Is too involved to go into now. It, I think, actually, on balance, compares more than favorably to products made from commercial timberlands.
Great. Jessica, your hand is up also. Did you have a question in addition to that? Question? I guess not. Okay. Our next question is from Phil Arman. And Phil is asking, does urban tree wood use depend on communities having wood recovery areas at their landfills? Then how do these areas sell the logs to companies? Does urban tree use depend on communities having wood recovery areas at their landfills? Then how do these areas sell logs to companies?
Well, that's some of a very specific question, but I would say in general that yes, it is very helpful, and there are examples from around the country where recovery efforts have been put in place at landfill areas or collection yards. So I would say yes, that is a very good strategy to implement if possible. As far as how the logs are then sold or disposed of or converted into a solid wood product or another product, that's going to really depend on the local situation, and I don't think we can probably go into that right now. That's a very specific question, and I'd be happy to talk to you offline, and we can maybe discuss your specific situation, depending on where you're located in the country. Sam, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, just a quick description of what's done in Cincinnati, Ohio. The Cincinnati Parks is taking down ash trees, and they're now accepting other ash trees. They have a marshaling yard that they ordinarily use. They've now opened it up to the public and to tree service companies to bring in logs. They have the logs then sawn into lumber. They send them, and that's a private mill owner, Woodmiser mill owner. The wood then goes to a kiln where it's dried. It's brought back to the city. It's sold to a company that then makes furniture for Cincinnati public schools. Now, this is a win-win-win situation for everybody. The Cincinnati Parks provides the marshaling yard where the logs can come in. There's a sawmill owner who can come in and for a fee, he saws the logs. They could work out an arrangement where he saws some and accepts some lumber if that was something that was in their mutual interest. But then products end up in Cincinnati public schools that cost less than would have been the case otherwise, and those also provides teachable moments. That's just one example, one scenario that could be worked out in cooperation with the public and private sector, where the public sector promotes this for the private sector. If you want to talk about this more, I'll make the same offer that Steve did. You could send me an email or call me, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you. We have another question from Margaret Fisher, and Margaret says, Sam, I'm reading your book and passing along to others in the woodworking industry as something to keep an eye on. I think urban wood is the new black, so to speak. More people are interested in making the best use of the resource close at hand. What marketing efforts are going out to the woodworking industry's members to create a new wave of interest for utilizing this material?
What we're trying to do right now is hold conferences. My personal view is there's sort of three epicenters in the United States: California, frankly, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the next one I'm hoping to be the next is Asheville, North Carolina. These are places where we can hold a conference, bring people together who are in the urban forest products business, who have an interest in being in the urban forest products business, nonprofits that support this idea, local parks departments and waste management and state natural resources, bring everybody in who has an interest in this. And in these three epicenters, begin to promote this whole idea. We just had a conference in the Presidio in San Francisco in California, and it drew from one end of the state to the other. It was the first conference of its kind not only in California but in the United States, and it was a success. A lot of people who do this met each other for the first time. There's a lot of networking. There's publicity that comes out of this, which alerts the public of the potential of our urban trees, although, to be quite honest, the public really gets this. This is not rocket science. I mean, in 2 sentences, you can explain to somebody how you can put a tree that's come down to better use than mulch or firewood. So I think that what I'd like to see, what I'm kind of hoping is that these epicenters, North Carolina, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and San Francisco, begin to spread nationwide, and we have ultimately the creation of the Urban Forest Products Alliance, which would represent this industry nationwide. And that's my short answer.
Thank you. And with that, we have one last question, and then we'll open up the lines just in case anyone wants to ask a question directly over the phone. The last question is from Bruce Horgan, and he's asking when the model Excel spreadsheet will be available for everyone to use.
Well, I guess I'll jump in and take a crack at that. Bruce, thanks for the question. The final report for this project is being prepared right now, and then that report will be submitted to the Wood Education and Resource Center sometime within the next month or 6 weeks, we're hoping. And then Ed Chesa, Steve Maluskas, and the folks at the Wood Education Resource Center then would make that available at that point. So it's not something that's available, that will be available tomorrow, but it definitely will be available this summer when the final report is concluded and all the editing is done and it's submitted as a final report to the Wood Education and Resource Center. And maybe Ed, if you're still on the line, if you want to say anything more on that.
I think you got it, Steve. Basically, all of our reports will be on our website, and once the final report and the spreadsheet submitted to us, we'll get it posted as soon as possible. And normally when, at least for the high-profile projects, we send out a WERC update more or less on a monthly basis, and we'll highlight the posting of the Excel spreadsheet in our monthly update also. Okay, then to conclude, are there any last-minute questions or comments from anyone?
I wanted to just ask 2 things. One, that spreadsheet for measuring, is that the FICAT tool or something like it?
No, it's not. It's something that was constructed for this study in particular.
And then I wanted to make a remark. Somebody was asking about the collection at a landfill for the material. And I wanted to remark that actually I had just recently heard of a project that was a construction project happening in Milwaukee in the Menominee Valley where they're going to be building some new things, and they took a number of trees down, and instead of just doing what they typically do here is, landfill it, what they did was they set a dumpster there, a huge, very large dumpster, the largest one you can get, and as they took these trees down, they cut them into, the whole bowl. They cut them into those lengths, put those all in that dumpster, and then had the waste removal company take that directly to the private sawmill where he sawed those up and made them into usable kiln-dried boards and sold them at his specialty lumber place. What a great, motivation on their part to try to find, the vehicle of going from, here's the material, how do we get it into the end user's hands? They put that together. I think that's a great model, very simple. That anybody could use anywhere, frankly, and you could do it construction site by construction site.
Thank you for that. That is a terrific idea. It just simply illustrates how I believe this is the year that the urban forest products industry is sort of forming itself and beginning to reach a critical point, a critical mass, where these kinds of things will begin to take place all over the country. And Carpe Annum this is the year to seize the opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Margaret, for the question. Any other ones? Okay, then we'll go ahead and conclude. I'd just like to thank once again Steve and Sam.
You're welcome.
And Jill. And one item just like to bring up is that our next webinar with Dovetail Partners and the Wood Education Resource Center will be Tuesday, June the 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the webinar is going to address bioenergy and climate policies and the impact on existing forest products industries. So that information will be posted on the Dovetail Partner website and also on the Wood Education Resource Center website. And if there's no other questions or comments, we will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and this concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.